Fun Ideas Productions presents the Fun Ideas Podcast.
We see the syphilitic shrinking obelisk, the white man's wilting dick. We see through dangling jowls of seedy game show trolls the smiling lie of the televised hive. The witches are watching with their thousand eyes. Witches are watching with their thousand eyes. We smell rotten teeth that speak beyond belief. A stick inside their skull would break.
Hi, this is Mark Arnold, and welcome to Fun Ideas Podcast number 41. This episode is sponsored by the fine folks at Lee's Comics.
Hi, I'm George Takei. You know me as Helmsman Sulu on Star Trek. When I'm not busy going Warp Factor 8, I like to beam down to Lee's Comics in Mountain View and spend a lazy afternoon reading comics classics from Marvel to DC, from Dark Horse to Fantagraphics, and everything in between. So please, spend some time here at Lee's Comics and spend your hard-earned cash.
The Fun Ideas Podcast is made possible by listeners like you and from Lee's Comics of California, selling you what your mother threw out since 1982, online at leescomics.com. Alvin, the story of Ross Bagdasarian Sr., Liberty Records, Format Films, and The Alvin Show is out. Order your hardback, paperback, and ebook copies today on Amazon and at BearManorMedia.com. The Warren Kremer, TTV Scrapbook, and Monkees solo books are in various stages of completion, so I have taken on a new project that currently has no official title, but it is a history of Mad magazine. I avoided doing a Mad history book for years, figuring that it had already been done and done well, when I realized that a complete Mad history had never been done since the early 1990s. So, I'm taking it upon myself to start that book. The Kickstarter for the comedy of Jack Davis and the comedy of John Severin was wildly successful, and we will be shipping the books and the other goodies during the month of October. Our guest today is my co-author for the two Monkees books, long title, Looking for the Good Times, examining the Monkees songs one by one, and the upcoming Headquartered, a timeline of the Monkees solo years. He's also written or compiled many other books which will be discussed, edited the fondly missed Animato magazine, and is a full-time lawyer. Here he is, Michael A. Ventrella. Okay, on the phone I have Michael A. Ventrella, who is a published author, especially a co-author of one of my books, which is about the Monkees, and we're also working together on a Monkees solo book. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking.
And I know you're also a lawyer and have been for probably like 30 years or something, it says, where I read it. How did you...
Yeah, remind me how old I am. Go ahead.
Well, you're 30 now. That's right. Congratulations.
Yes, exactly.
So how did you get into being a lawyer and an author?
Oh, my goodness. Well, I always wanted to be a musician when I was young, and that's one of the reasons I was into the Monkees, because they were popular right at the time that I was growing up, so it was very influential on me, until I discovered the Beatles, and then the Beatles became my main influence, of course. And so during college, I've always been a very political person, and anyone who goes to my blog knows that, and I have a new book coming out about politics as well, and law. In any event, I was a political science major, but my real goal was to make it as a musician. But I knew that's very unlikely, because any type of entertainment field, it's very hard. A lot of it is just connections. A lot of it is just being in the right place at the right time. That's the way it is for anybody, including writers.
Yep.
And sometimes you just hit it and you're surprised. Suddenly you're popular, and sometimes you can work your ass off and nothing happens. So really, going to law school was kind of my backup plan if the musicians didn't work out. After getting my degree in political science, I moved up to Boston and to law school and had another band in Boston that actually got the radio play and was, never quite make it, but we were close. We played all the big clubs, but never really made it. So, by that time I was a lawyer. So that's kind of how it happened. Although, honestly, in Boston, I was more political than I was a lawyer. I was a public defender in Boston, but I also worked on political campaigns, and I was a campaign manager, and I was a lobbyist for a while, so I did politics and law. Mm-hmm. And now I'm just doing law.
Okay. What's your practice in? What do you emphasize on your cases?
I'm doing criminal practice is what I do, which is more interesting to me. Since I do care about justice and political issues, that's one of the good ways that I feel like I'm doing something to help protect people's rights. Mm-hmm. So I do lots of criminal cases, mostly. In fact, that's all I do now. When I was younger, I did all kinds of stuff because you have to pay bills, but now, unfortunately, I'm got a good reputation, and I'm just doing criminal stuff.
Oh, that's cool. So you get to specialize, basically.
Yeah, which is good. You want lawyers who specialize. You don't go to a foot doctor if your head hurts, and
right.
When you get arrested, you want to hire me, not somebody who does real estate.
Right.
So yeah, that's how it works.
Now, of course, it sounds like you've been successful as a lawyer. Any pinings to go back into music, or do you still play, or anything like that at this time?
Oh, I still have my instruments, and I play every now and then. One of my bands from college, the Naughty Dicks, we called ourselves back when I was in college. Used to play really, new wavy Elvis Costello, Graham Parker type of music. I wrote a lot of the songs. Mm-hmm. And so about a year or so ago, we got back together again, and we're recording our old songs now that we have the equipment. Back in those days, if you wanted to make a record, you had to spend thousands and thousands of dollars in the studio on tape. Now, the drummer lives in Texas. He recorded his drum track. They sent him, by email to the guitarist who added his track, and I went down and added my part.
Wow.
And we're putting something together. So, it's just a fun project. We're not planning on, making any money off of it. It's just a fun little reunion we're doing.
Well, that's cool. That's a way to do a reunion.
Yeah, exactly. It's never quite as nice that you're all playing together, because there's something about a band playing together where you can get a lot more energy than you can doing it this way, It's
right.
hard to describe to a non-musician.
No, I know exactly how you mean, because you kind of riff off of each other, whereas it's kind of a sterile environment if you're just sitting there by yourself playing a guitar or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Did any of the other members of your band have similar success in another field like yourself, or?
Well, yeah, they're all pretty successful, but none of them as musicians or anything, unfortunately.
Okay.
What happens is that the most successful person who was around me when I was in college was Amy Mann from Till Tuesday. Remember her?
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Basically, I went to college with her and high school, and she used to come and see my band. And what would happen is we got to be pretty good friends, and she actually dated the guitarist, and then we both moved to Boston, coincidentally. She went to Boston to study music, and I went to Boston to study law, and frustratingly, I wish I had gotten back together with her and said, hey, do you need a bass player? Because maybe I'd be a musician these days. She made it, my band didn't.
Wow.
So that's the closest I get, I'm afraid.
Right.
Yeah.
But, how did the books come along? Because, your books are on a diverse series of topics. Of course, the Monkees book is music, but, I'm looking through them trying to find some sort of thread. There is some legal stuff. You have, Sherlock Holmes stuff. So, how did you get into writing those books and compiling? Some of them you didn't write. You're like an editor or something like that, too?
The editor, yeah, exactly. That's a little different. So, basically, back in the old days, I did lots of writing throughout my life, of course, because, when in school and stuff, I worked on school newspapers. I wrote a play when I was in high school that the school put on. I did, I've constantly been writing. I just never tried to write a book before in a long way. As you must be aware, I started a magazine back in the 80s called Animato,
right,
which was a magazine about animation. Mm-hmm. And so I wrote for that, of course. And, and my point is, the more you write, the better you get, clearly, So by the time I got older, I went, I should write a book. And what had happened was, I also started a live-action role-playing game back in the late 80s, where people dress up in costume and go out and do all that kind of stuff. So I wrote the books for those, and I ran those, and technically, honestly, I still own it, but someone else runs it for me now. We have chapters all over the world. So I have that as well. So what happened was I said, I'm going to write a fantasy novel because I love to read fantasy novels, and I placed it in the world of my game because I'd already created the world. I knew how everything worked. I had maps. I had everything I needed. So the first novel was called Arch Enemy.
Okay.
And yes, there's an arch involved. And so the idea behind that was I wrote a story that took place in the world of the game. I didn't use any of the game rules, though, because, what works in a game doesn't work in fiction and vice versa, So if you read the book, you don't think, oh, this is based on a game, So that was the first one, and then I wrote a sequel to that. And honestly, if it's sold really, really well, I probably still do them. But I'm still trying to write that breakthrough novel, it's going to make me famous. So the next novel after that was called Bloodsuckers, A Vampire Runs for President.
Oh, wow.
Which I wrote before Trump became president. It's a political thriller with lots of humor. All my books have lots of humor in them. But that was a fun one to write. And then the most recent one is called Big Stick, which is a Teddy Roosevelt steampunk adventure with Teddy Roosevelt and Mark Twain and Harry Tubman. And it's just, all my books are fun. They're not meant to be serious. They're fun adventures. So that's how I got started. But then I started editing as well. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
I started doing a series called Tales of Vertanis.
Okay.
And there have been 5 series of these so far. These are stories that take place in the world of the books and the game. But once more, we don't get it. A lot of the people who wrote these stories have never played my game. They just write good fantasy stories, but I make sure that they're consistent so, it doesn't... It feels like a real world, if you know what I mean.
So it's kind of like fan fiction, for lack of another word?
Yeah, I guess, but the point is anyone can read it. You don't have to be a fan, you don't have to play the game, they're just good stories.
Okay.
So I'm real happy with a lot of these authors, and they sold okay. Next, I wrote a short story. I had short stories in other anthologies that I'd written in magazines and things. So I wrote a short story that you would like because it's about the Beatles, actually. It's a Sherlock Holmes story that takes place in the future, and the Beatles play a part of it. And the character is a woman who claims to be Sherlock Holmes' descendant. And so it was a good story. It got printed, and she has to figure out a mystery. And I thought it'd be cool to have a whole bunch of stories all about what if Sherlock Holmes was a woman? What if Sherlock Holmes was a child? What if Sherlock Holmes was an alien or a vampire? That kind of idea. And I mentioned it to Jonathan Mayberry, who is a, world-famous New York Times bestselling author whose latest books are being made into a Netflix series as we talk, And he went, that's a great idea. Can I do it with you? And I went, yes! Of course you can do it with me.
Nah.
New York Times bestselling author, yeah, I'm going to say yes to him. So we got an agent, and she was able to sell the audio rights too, so you can get the audio book on that. And there were two series of that. Baker Street Irregulars was called. And we got a bunch of famous authors. All these authors I had grown up reading when I was a kid. I contacted a lot of them, and they went, "Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. I'll give you a story." So I'm editing David Gerald, and all these famous people, Lawrence Watt Evans, these people who I've read when I was a kid. I'm going, this is great. I'm editing the people I love.
Wow.
So that was fun.
So how does that work? Like if I'm not, I'll use it for lack of a better term myself. If I wanted to write for your book, how would that work? Or you have to be a famous published author, or how does the process work?
Sure. For the Baker Street Irregulars, what happened was Jonathan and I contacted people we wanted to have in the book, and that book was done by royalties, basically. So they knew they were going to get paid because we had an agent and they worked out the deal and all that kind of stuff. We got an advance and all that kind of stuff. Because you don't get the big guys unless you pay them.
Right, of course.
And we got enough big guys to attract attention to make sure that a publisher would go, hey, I want this, and they bought it. Then I opened it up and I said, we're opening it up for anybody who wants to write me a story. And I put it on my webpage, which is michaelaventrella.com, whenever I edit one of these books. And I just open it up because, as far as I'm concerned, even if you've never been published before, if you write a great story, I want it.
Right. Okay.
And so we got a bunch of, we have some famous people in there who were like picked. They're like invited. And then we open it up, and there's other people who get, if they write a good story, they get put in there. So that's how it works out.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
With the last two anthologies I've done, one is called Release the Virgin. The idea behind that anthology, we were at a convention one time, and it was late at night, and me and a bunch of authors and editors and things were sitting around the table just, drinking and having a dinner or whatever. And someone told a story about biology and said, Release the Virgin, having to do with animals and the tests they had to do, with fruit flies, believe it or not. And I said, that's a great title for a book. And one of the authors said, I'll write a story for that. And the publisher said, hey, I'll publish that. And next thing you know,
wow.
A book called Release the Virgin. The idea behind this book was every single story had to contain that phrase somewhere in the story. And that's the only requirement we gave them.
Oh.
So what we did was we got a whole bunch of famous authors, and we, once more, I invited them in, and we did a Kickstarter for this one, just to make sure we had enough money to do it. So we did a Kickstarter, and people paid, money to either to order a book in advance, so we knew we'd have the money to pay the authors. And we had a limit, and we made the limit, of course, and we paid all the authors to put the book out. So that was a huge seller, actually. Did very well.
Very cool.
And then, of course, the most recent one is the Beatles one.
Okay. Is that one done? Because I think the last I heard, you were having some delays with some authors or something like that. So is that now complete?
Correct. It is now complete. What happens is it is now the publisher is publishing, as we speak, the advance review copy. Basically what they do is they publish a whole bunch of paperbacks that say in big letters, advance review copy, not for sale. Then it gets sent out to the magazines for reviews, basically. So that happens, and then the book should be out in December. The concept behind this book is sort of like the Sherlock book. My idea was, what if the Beatles were XYZ? So we have people telling stories about the Beatles as, aliens, time travelers. Some are just stories of what if the Beatles had made this decision instead of that decision? What if they had stayed with Pete Best, for instance, that kind of stuff,
Right.
So it's a good collection of really great stories, once more, with some really famous authors in there that I'm thrilled to have. And we, of course, opened it up to anybody else. So there's some people who have never been published in anything major before who are suddenly in these books with these famous authors who are just thrilled, but they wrote good stories. What can I tell you?
So what's the name of it?
We had so many stories, I had to throw so many out. I'm so frustrated because there were some really good ones that I just couldn't accept because there just wasn't room. So we might do a sequel.
So what's the book called, the final title?
The book is called Across the Universe. We thought that was a good title that sort of gave the idea that there's lots of different, stories and ideas here. And of course, there's limited. We can only do so much as you have. It's not like we can quote songs or anything, and no one could write a story based on a song. No one could write the story of Eleanor Rigby, for instance.
Right.
Because that's a copyrighted thing. So it's more, Beatle variations. I got Spider Robinson, who was a pretty famous author, gave me a story. Jody Lynn Nye, Alan Steele, David Gerald, Cat Rambo, Keith DeCandido, Gail Z. Martin, Alan Goldshire. Alan Goldshire, you might know, he wrote a book called Paul is Undead. Have you heard about this
Yes,
book?
I have heard that book. I didn't know the author name, but yeah.
Right. It was a fun book to read, and he wrote a story that takes place in the world of his book, so we put that in there, of course. Gregory Benford, Gregory Frost. So I got a bunch of really good names. We actually have 25 stories in this. It's a big book because we made enough money on the Kickstarter to make the book bigger. So that's my latest project.
And on all these Sherlock Holmes or Beatles or anything, is there a requirement that they have to be serious, or that can be humorous, or is there any requirements in that way, or no?
No requirements like that. There's some of them that are quite joking, and some of them that are tremendously serious. There's one story in here where George meets with Richard Nixon and tries to convince him to stop the Vietnam War, and it goes exactly opposite of what he wanted. That's kind of a sad ending.
Wow.
But some of them are really funny. Like, Gail Martin wrote, what if the Beatles were like the Scooby-Doo gang, driving around in a van trying to solve mysteries.
Wow. So, sounds like a...
So, it goes back and forth,
Sounds like a splendid time is guaranteed for all, huh? Okay.
Absolutely.
So you say that there's enough...
You don't like...
Go ahead.
there's just enough variation that if you don't like one story, just keep going. The next one you should like.
Okay. But you said there's enough enough stories that you're going to do a sequel. Is that true then?
I said, I don't know if we will or not.
Okay.
Sometimes you don't want to beat a dead horse, you know.
Right.
But at the same, a lot of it will depend on how much it sells. You know,
right.
If it really sells well and people are demanding it, we might. But even if we did have a second book, I would open it up for more stories too.
Right.
The point is, some of those stories that didn't quite make it, I'd hold on to, and if I didn't get better ones, I'd say, okay, now I can take the story.
Right. Okay.
And that's you know, the sad thing is I had to say no to friends.
Right.
You know, who write good stories and I go, oh, I just can't fit it. You know, what can I do?
Yeah.
That's the hardest part about being an editor, and in the publishing industry, you got to learn that never take rejection seriously. Because I've also been rejected by friends.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you with Animato, I had my Harveyville fun times. So, yes, I know what that's like. And the person says, "Why can't you put my story?" And it's like, well, I don't have room. Yeah. It's like,
Sometimes you don't have room. Sometimes you have I got about 4 or 5 different stories for this Beatle one that had the same basic theme.
Oh.
And some of them were both, I mean, they could have all been good, but I can't have 4 stories with the same idea.
Right.
You know, so sometimes it gets rejected for reasons having nothing to do with whether the story's any good or not. Mm-hmm. You know, it's got to fit.
Since I mentioned Animato, going back to the Animato days, I think that's the first time you and I ever spoke. How did you start that one, and how did it kind of end up? Because I don't think you were doing it at the end. I was always kind of curious about the history of that publication.
Yeah, basically, I'm a very creative person, but I'm not very good as a business person, if that makes sense. You know,
join the club.
What happened was I started Animato as a small little, you know, Xerox little hand thing we put out there. It was small, you know, and we sold it in the local comic book stores, and you know, we would host animation shows, because back in those days, you know, there was no internet. There was no, you couldn't see it on TV. We'd rent the films and actually have showings, so you could see all these old cartoons no one had ever seen before. And we showed them at Harvard University. We had a place for us to show them. And we'd invite people over, and then, of course, when we invite them, we'd say, hey, why don't you subscribe to our magazine? And they would. And it kept growing and growing. And then Harry McCracken really took it over. Harry McCracken was one of our writers who also lived with us in Boston. He ended up editing Computer Times magazine, one of those computer magazines.
Right.
Animato. He used Animato on his resume to do that, and he sort of took it over and made it an 8.5 by 11, and even still, it was still in black and white. You know, the covers were still in black and white too, because we couldn't afford too much, and it just kept growing. And I edited a few issues, and he edited a few issues. And one of the problems was I also had a band, and I was a lawyer, and I was working on policy, and I didn't have a lot of time. And so quite often it would come out late, you know, because it wasn't like it was making money. You know, it was paying for itself, but I wasn't getting rich off of it, clearly.
Right.
And I just didn't have time. And after a while, I had G. Michael Dobbs said, look, I understand you don't have time to do this. Can I buy the magazine from you? And I went, okay. So we worked out a deal, and he took it over. I still wrote columns for it every now and then. And he made it even bigger, so it was on magazines, you know, newsstands and things. So he did a good job. But of course, just like all magazines, when the internet came out, it's kind of died out, you know.
Yeah.
And then of course, magazines like Animation came out. That was they had a big money behind that one. That was like a Hollywood, you know.
Right.
They could afford to put out these big color magazines we couldn't afford to do. So they kind of gave us competition as well.
Right. But I preferred yours. And also David Maruse's Mind Rot, which became Animania, you know.
No, Mind Rot came before Animato, but we didn't know anything about it. I'd never seen Mind Rot before.
Oh, I see.
That was West Coast, and we were here on the East Coast.
Oh, okay.
It wasn't until after I started Animato that I found out about it.
Yeah.
Because maybe I would have written for him, you know? At the time, we said, there's nothing here for animation fans. You know? I mean, especially back in the 80s, there was nothing. TV was crappy Hanna-Barbera stuff, you know? Disney wasn't putting out anything good. Nobody was doing animation back in those days, so there was a need for it, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
One of my first subscribers, believe it or not, was Mark Hamill.
Wow.
Which is cool. And, you know, I geeked out, but I almost wanted to write to him, and I went, I better not bug him, you know. You don't want to bug the guy. So that was kind of cool. But I got a letter from Chuck Jones that I held on to, you know, and there was one fan who was named Pete Doctor who wrote to us every now and then. It turns out he's now one of the big, you know, the directors was one of our early members, so it was kind of cool.
Well, I think you and Mindrod had some of the same writers. It just was the luck of the thing. I mean, you had, I think, wasn't Jim Corcus in both, and
Jim Corcus,
Jerry Beck. Yeah. Which, for me as a fan, I didn't mind. You know, I like both their writings. They were all these kind of idols of mine and mentors or whatever, you know, and I'm still friends with both of them, so it's like, you know, and...
And they invited me to join what was called Apatoons.
Yeah.
Back in those days, there was amateur press associations. Apatoons was the one for animation. There was like 30 of us. And we'd each write our little newsletters back before the internet and staple it together and send it to everybody. And that's how I got to meet Leonard Maltin and all those guys, Jerry Beck. And I got, you know, they invited me to join them because they saw Animato. And that was great. Made some great connections there, too. It was kind of fun.
Yep. I got a few of those issues, but I ended up writing for a different APA called WTFB, which was Where the Fun Begins, which was about the Disney Afternoon. Now, I wasn't a huge fan of Disney Afternoon, but I was a huge fan of Disney, so I used to contribute to that. So, but yeah, everybody was talking about
things were a lot different back in those days, weren't they?
Yes. You know, it's like you got to make your 30 copies and send it out, you know, and all that stuff. You know, it's so weird now. You know, it's like, yeah, I did all that stuff, and so did you. And it's like,
Yeah, it is. But, you know, the internet's made things so much better because one of the things is, thanks to Twitter and Facebook, I've been able to become friends with all these authors and animators and people that I would never be able to talk to previously.
That's true.
And connections, the secret of success in life, there's three things. One is talent, one is hard work, and one is meeting the right people. I'm convinced. You know, and the internet has made that much easier. So that's one of the reasons I've been able to get all these big names to, you know, contribute to my books. Thanks to that kind of connection, which we never would have been able to do in the 80s, you know, the real handwritten letters.
Yeah, or as quickly, because you might, you know, handwrite all these letters, and then 6 months, a year, 2 years goes down the line. Oh, yeah, I saw your letter, and I decided to finally write back. Where, you know, now you can.
Yeah, exactly. And you wouldn't know where to send it to. You send it to their publisher, and their publisher might sit on it for 3 days till they give it to them. You know, so.
Right, exactly.
So, I am a fan of technology. Trust me.
Yeah, and I have to admit I am too, even though it killed my newspaper career. But it's like,
yeah, exactly. It's that's the sad part.
Yeah.
And it's also sad to see so many newspaper cartoonists that have gone out of business because the newspapers are dying too.
Yeah.
You know, syndicated comics. On one hand, you can see them all online nowadays, but they're not making any money off of that. You know? So I feel sorry for them.
Yeah. So.
Yeah. One of whom I should mention. Do you know Darren Bell? He does a strip called Canderville.
Okay, name sounds familiar, so I probably do.
Yeah, he has a strip called Canderville. He also does editorial cartoons.
Okay.
And I've been a fan of his Canderville, which is sort of a Doonesbury type of comic because there's lots of politics and stuff, so I like it. And I wrote the introduction to one of his books like 4 or 5 years ago because I got to be friends with him because I was a fan. So my latest book that's going to come out very, very soon, should have been out by now, but unfortunately it's like a week late, it's called How to Argue the Constitution with a Conservative. And it's basically a guide for the Constitution. How can I say this? It's a Constitution for Dummies book.
Yeah.
But with lots of humor and sarcasm. So basically I'm saying, if you want to argue the Constitution, you got to know what it is first.
Right,
people
exactly.
think they know what it is and they don't.
Yeah, and I did jot that down. I was going to ask you about this. Is just that, you know, it seems in a certain respect, you know, kind of a left turn from what you normally do, but considering your background, it makes perfect sense now. So, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I used to actually teach constitutional law at community colleges, so it's not like I haven't taught this stuff before. And I have a blog, a political blog, where I write a lot of this stuff. So some of the stuff in the book is actually taken from the blog and been rewritten and updated and all that kind of stuff. But what I was going to say is I got Darren Bell to do the illustrations for the book.
Okay.
So he's doing the cover, he's doing illustrations inside. I've got old Canterville strips, some of his old editorial cartoons, and he's done a bunch of new stuff for me, too. And right when we were getting ready to send it out for reviews, he wins the Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartoons.
Hey.
So here I am with my new book coming out with cartoons by Pulitzer Prize winning Darren Bell. Oh my God!
Yay!
I couldn't ask for better timing.
Wow. So is that out yet? I thought it said a release date of like next week or something. Well, when we're recording this,
yeah.
So it'll probably be out by the time this airs. But
oh, I certainly hope so. Yeah. I'm just waiting for the publisher to tell me it's done. You know, so it should be out any day now. It's being published by Gray Rabbit Publications in New York. And,
what do you think? And I'm sure you cover it in the book. But what do you think is the most misinterpreted bit in the Constitution? Would it be something about guns or something about, well, name it. What would it be, do you think?
I would agree with the guns part, because everyone argues over what it means, and for many, many years it meant one thing, and then the Supreme Court with Justice Scalia, like 15 years ago, came around and said, no, it means something completely different. Mm-hmm. And I go and argue about what the actual founders meant and why the Second Amendment was in there and why people misinterpret it. People love that, and the thing that bugs me most about a lot of conservatives, not all, of course, is that they will say things like, you have to read this as literally as possible. There are no exceptions whatsoever. And there's exceptions to everything. You know, the First Amendment has exceptions. The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law, and you can't yell fire in a crowded theater and start a riot. You can't give political secrets. You can't give military secrets.
Right.
You know, obscenity is limited. You know, there's all kind of restrictions on the First Amendment, and then they turn around and they agree with all that and say, but there's none on the Second. You can have bazookas if you want to.
Right. I mean,
there's an entire chapter just on the Second Amendment, as you might guess.
Was there a specific reason, I guess you probably describe it in the book, of why there was such a turnabout on that particular amendment, or it was just Scalia himself and everybody followed suit, or how'd that work?
Well, I don't talk about it too much in the book, but basically the NRA, about, I don't know, 30 years ago decided they stopped being a group that was for gun safety and actually supported gun limitations, and they turned around and they got taken over by the gun lobby, the people who actually make the guns, and suddenly they became, we're going to make sure that this is an individual right that everybody has, and they pretty much spent a lot of time, you know, Charleston Heston, you can take the gun out of my cold dead hands, blah, blah, blah. You know, they hired famous people to come in and make these commercials and things,
right.
And the next thing you know, people are believing it.
Wow.
And it goes and it trickles up. It trickles up, you know, and the Supreme Court, you know, I can talk about Scalia for over and over, but,
right.
You know, you get bad Supreme Court justices who don't care and just do whatever they want, you know. It's like Kavanaugh now, he's probably going to he's going to make abortion illegal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, one of the key issues in the book is people have to realize, and this is a problem both sides have, is that the Constitution is a political document written by politicians and interpreted by politicians.
Yeah.
Judges are elected or else they're appointed by politicians. It's all about politics.
Right.
It's not about law. It's not like you can just plug something in and the law comes out and says, here's what it is. And people think that there's one right answer, and there isn't. The answer is whoever the judges says it is. And that's one of the issues that I keep pounding over and over in the book. And if you come out of the book with that understanding, that I will have accomplished something.
Right. I have studied Constitution in recent years because of, you know, aggressive, assertive opinions about certain things that are wrong. But a couple that I've noticed is, and why do people get these wrong? It's I'm kind of curious about it. It's like more than one person, this is of course on our wonderful social media that we just praised, has said that, you know, like Obama can come back and do a third term because there was a gap between his presidency and now. And I said, no, you can't. The maximum anybody can be president is 10 years, according to the current law. Is that the correct interpretation?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
People make up all kind of stuff. Or they also say Obama can come back as a vice president. No, he can't, because in order to be vice president, you have to be eligible to be president.
Right.
And so he's not.
Yeah.
So no, they're just dreaming. That's the point. People on the left also misinterpret the Constitution, especially when it comes to the First Amendment.
Right.
You know, they think that things can. They're against censorship unless they agree with it. Then it should be censored. You know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's like, oh, give me a break.
And then other things I'm kind of curious about. There was this one. I always forget how the description of this amendment, but it was the 27th Amendment just kind of quietly came into being, after almost 200 years or something like that. And you can describe what it is in more detail. But it's like, yet like the Equal Rights Amendment had a time limit on it, and so it doesn't look like it'll ever pass, although it's still like one state short or something like that. So what's the difference on these, and how does those type of things work?
The 27th Amendment was the one that was actually proposed with the original Constitution, and it said pretty much that the Congress cannot pass its own salary increase. They can't, turn around and give themselves a salary increase.
Right.
And it got passed by a lot of states, but not enough to pass way back then. And then some student happened to notice this and wrote a paper on it, and the teacher gave him a bad grade. He says, "Oh, yeah?" And the student went out and got a bunch of states to pass it, and now it's the 27th Amendment. So 200 years later, it's the 27th Amendment.
Wow, okay.
Because they didn't put a deadline on it.
Okay.
The ERA, they did put a deadline on it.
Oh, okay.
That deadline can easily be changed by Congress. Congress can turn around and say, "Okay, we're getting rid of the deadline." Amendments, they're not hard to get past Congress. It's just getting it past all the states is the problem.
Yeah. Okay. So are there any more like the 27th Amendment that are looming? That one just kind of crept up on me, and I said, wow, now there's 27, because I knew the 26 was about the voting age being 18, and that's all she wrote. And then suddenly, we got a 27th one here. So are there any more?
It kind of slipped onto the radar. I mean, when it happened, those of us who studied the law knew about it, but the average person didn't really pay much attention, I don't think, because it wasn't a big, huge, gigantic thing. There's always proposals for amendments. I propose a whole bunch of them in my book that I'd love to see, such as, getting rid of the part that says D.C. is separate. D.C. should be either its own state or just make it part of Maryland, because the people in D.C. don't get a representation, and that's ridiculous. That's one. Mm-hmm. So, there's things like that I propose, but as far as honestly what's out there, I'm not sure. I mean, there's lots of them, but I don't think there's anything too close that's being passed right now. Okay.
And what about you're saying that the Constitution can be interpreted many, many ways. What is the likelihood of, thanks to our current president and stuff like that, of things like the 25th Amendment being kind of more detail-oriented in the future, so certain things don't happen, again, if you know what I mean.
It's very hard to get an amendment passed because you got to get the three-fourths of the state, and a lot of the states will just, never do it, like the ERA, which should have been passed, but isn't.
Right.
As far as the 25th Amendment goes, that was passed after JFK was shot, because the idea was, what if he was in a coma? What do we do in that kind of situation?
Right.
What if the president is completely incompetent? The problem is determining what is incompetent, and of course this is all about politics. Nothing matters. I mean, the whole idea of our government is checks and balances. The president can't do too much because Congress will check and balance him. The problem we have right now is we have a Congress that refuses to do that. So the government is not working because Mitch McConnell doesn't do anything. He's got piles of things on his desk, and he doesn't pass it. He doesn't check and balance the president like the Senate is supposed to.
Yeah.
So our government only works if Congress does its job, the president does his job, and the Supreme Court does its job. And if they're all taken over by the same party and they're all corrupt, well, that's what's going to happen. So that's the whole problem. We got to vote these guys out.
Right. And of course, there's probably no clauses anywhere that really says they have to do their job, correct? Or is that incorrect?
Well, no, you're correct there. Well, it sort of does, but how are you going to enforce it?
Right.
For example, when Obama nominated a Supreme Court justice, according to the Constitution, Congress shall have hearings.
Right.
And they didn't.
Right.
They didn't have the hearings. Now, what are you going to do? You're going to appeal to the Supreme Court, which is full of a bunch of Republican appointees who aren't going to do anything. So it only works if you have honest people in there who do their job.
Wow.
One of the things about Watergate was that there were a bunch of Republicans who supported Nixon, but when they suddenly, realized, this is not right, we got to do what's right for the country, and that was right for Nixon, they did their job. Mm-hmm. We've got a bunch of Republicans now who aren't doing their job, and that's the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Because if Obama did a tenth of what Trump is doing, they'd be impeached him by now. Right?
Yes. I agree.
Obviously.
Yeah, and, it's just frustrating. Hopefully everybody will...
I'm quite depressed with the way our country is going right now, and it's important that everybody fights. When Trump comes out a day or so ago and talks about how Jews are the problem and they're, and they're disloyal, it's like, oh, that's the next step on my list of fascism checkpoint.
Fascism
we're
checklist.
moving down that direction. It's like, come on, what more do you guys need? If you sit there and you say to yourself, if I was around in Nazi Germany during those days, I would have done this. Well, now's your chance.
Yeah. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry. You got me not talking about politics now. Oh, boy.
Oh, so...
In any event, my book is like that, too, people. Read the book.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this about the book, because I haven't read it, obviously, but I'd love to. Of all your books, besides the Monkees book, it was like, wow, this is really good, and it's coming out now. But is it a good book if you're conservative and you want to try to talk to a liberal, like flipping it around? I mean, I totally understand why you've had a title like that, but or would a conservative be too angry? Would they be too angry to look at your book?
It depends. Yeah. I'm going to make a distinction between conservative and Trump supporters, okay?
Okay.
Because it is possible to talk logic with conservatives, and I do. On my Facebook page, I have some conservative friends, and we have good debate. Mm-hmm. I can debate what the purpose of government is and what the meaning of the Constitution is, and we can have some really good arguments about that kind of stuff and still be friends. Mm-hmm. Trump people pay no attention to logic and facts. So it doesn't matter what you say to them. It doesn't mean a thing. So, yeah, they're going to hate the book because it contradicts their worldview, So you can't argue with Trump people, and I don't waste my time. Yeah. If you say, well, blah, 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 and they say, no, I know this, and they're absolutely 100% wrong, what's the point, Climate change is the problem. Climate change doesn't exist. I'm not going to waste my time arguing with you. You're too stupid. That kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, if you're a Trump supporter, no, it's not going to do any good. But if you're a rational person, liberal or conservative, yeah, you should get something out of the book.
All right. And you said the drawings are designed to compliment, and they're done in like a humorous way?
Yeah, basically what I did was, some of them are very funny because they're from the Canterville comic strips. Some of them are his actual editorial cartoons, which some are very funny and some are not. They're serious. Mm-hmm. But he also did, for every single chapter, there's like 16 chapters, he did a separate drawing for each chapter. Those are original for the book, so that's kind of nice. Cool.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so is that one going to be in the usual places, or do you have to order it online, or what's the best way?
Well, you could order it. Once it's out, you'll be able to order it anywhere, Amazon, online, and hopefully it'll get to some bookstores, but I don't know, how it is. Some of these bookstores don't carry these small publishers.
Right.
So you never know. If you can always go to a bookstore and request it. That's not true. A problem.
That's true.
Say, can you order this for me? They'll order it for you, but you can just order it yourself on Amazon if you want.
Right. Okay, very good. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to that one. So, but
thank you. It's a quick read. It's meant to be an introduction. It's not a textbook.
Right.
It's meant to be a fun way to look at it, have some laughs, get to understand it. It's not a very thick book. I didn't want it to be thick.
And so, you literally cover...
Say, why did you talk about this? And I say, well, I want it to be a thin book. Okay, go ahead.
But you literally cover every article, every amendment, and everything in detail, even the ones that are gone, that were replaced, like prohibition, or is it just the ones that people argue about? Oh, okay.
I talk about the things that people will argue about.
Okay.
Some of the articles are very boring because they're like, here's how Congress is set up. Well, there's never any debates about that, so I'm not going to go into that too much. Some of the amendments are really, we don't need to talk about that. The book is to help you argue the Constitution, and nobody argues about this stuff. Mm-hmm. So that stuff's not in there. Okay. At the end of the book, of course, is the entire Constitution, so you can read it yourself if you want to.
Okay, very good. Okay. But one question about it is there any description in your book, and if not, you could just say it here, of just what it takes to become an amendment in the Constitution? I know you said it needs to be ratified, but is there any consistency about it? I mean, is it always like 2/3, or is it 3/4, or it just depends on which one it is?
No, it's always 3/4. That's when the Constitution requires it.
Okay.
Yeah, but you got to get it passed by Congress first, and that can be 50% in Congress, but and then they have to go to all the states. Mm-hmm. And the problem with that is when it was written, it kind of made sense. Each state was kind of equal. There's no way all the states are equal anymore. That's part of the problem with our electoral college and the way the government is set up. Because what happens is these smaller states have much, much more power than they should. Okay. When the population of Montana is smaller than the District of Columbia. Right. They have more power, and that doesn't make any sense. one person in Montana is equal to, it takes, 50 people in California to equal one person in Montana. That doesn't make any sense.
Right, right.
And that's part of the problem with our Constitution as it stands now.
Mm-hmm. And do you discuss that in the book, or no?
Oh, yeah. There's a whole chapter on why we should get rid of the Electoral College and how, the problem is that small states have too much control.
Okay.
And what that's meaning to our government,
Very cool. Okay.
And gerrymandering, of course, because that's part of it, too.
All right, so when that one comes out, I'll definitely get that one. So, you sold me.
Yes, it should be useful. It should help you with arguing with people, hopefully.
All right, and now let's argue for the remainder of the show. Who's your favorite monkey? No, just kidding. Actually, for our listeners, I will say my side of the story, but you can say your side. Well, what possessed you to do a Monkees book rather than any other group? And contact me about it.
Sure. Well, I enjoyed your Beatles book, And mind you, there's like 20 Beatles book that goes into each song, and you have your Beatles book, Mark looks at the Beatles. I'm sorry if I'm getting the title exactly wrong, but and I enjoyed it. And I thought, well, there should be a Monkees book like that. And I thought, well, maybe Mark will want to write that with me, because I'd love to write that.
Yeah.
And then we talked about it, and then I got discouraged because there is a Monkees book like that, but it didn't say what I wanted to say about the songs. It said what he wanted to say about the songs. And then I thought about it, and I said, well, there's 50 Beatles books like that. We can have 2 Monkees books like this. What's wrong with that? And so it sort of grew from there,
But why Monkees? Why not, say, Turtles or Animals or Taylor Swift or whatever?
Okay. Well, part of it is, like I said before, the Monkees were the influential thing to me. When I was a kid, I saw the Monkees, and other kids wanted to be astronauts and policemen, and I wanted to be a monkey. I wanted to have a band and play in music and have wild adventures, and I did live up to some of that, not all of it, but some of it. So the Monkees were influential to me when I was right at that influential age that it means something to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought as well, there is a definite Monkees following. There are people who still love the Monkees, and go to these shows and all that kind of stuff. And I think they would have a better sale than the Turtles, for instance. I think a Turtle book, while I'd like to write one, doesn't have as much of an audience that would buy it either. So that was part of it, honestly, too.
Yeah. But what about are you fans of, I never really asked you this, of course I haven't really talked to you at great length, we're usually just talking about putting the book together. But what type of music are you the biggest fan of? Is it more like 60s music, or do you like all genres, or what's your favorite type of music?
I like what used to be called New Wave, which would be Elvis Costello and Boingo Boingo and Joe Jackson, and all that stuff was very influential on me when I was in college, and that's the kind of music I like to play. And the B-52s and Blondie, and nowadays I listen to Panic at the Disco. I like clever, intelligent music that's got a good melody to it. So a lot of 60s music definitely fits into that category. But if you look at my collection, it's going to be Squeeze, and it's going to be Blondie, and it's going to be the more fun pop music is what I don't know how to describe it better than that.
Yeah.
I should go look at my record collection while I'm talking to you. That would be able to name a little.
Well, I remember now you like XTC a lot, and
oh gosh, they're one of my favorites. As you can see in the Monkees book, I put them out. I definitely praise Andy Partridge, who leads XTC all the time. I think he's great, and he responded to one of my tweets one time, and I was thrilled. That's kind of nice. I spoke to Andy Partridge.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. I did it kind of the backwards way. We haven't really talked about this, but I like 60s music and 80s music the best too. But I started off with the Beatles, and then I branched off to Rolling Stones and The Who and everybody else in the 60s, the Kinks and all that stuff. And it wasn't until New Wave started kicking in that I started getting into things like The Art of Noise and Thompson Twins, and eventually I came around to ones that I initially dismissed, like Duran Duran and things like that, because I thought they were too childish.
I got a few years on you, so you're a little bit younger than me, so you came into it at a little bit past when I came into it.
Yeah.
Because, I started college in '77.
Yeah.
So, that's when a very influential years for me. So, yeah, it sounds like if I was a little bit younger, I probably would have been like you.
Yeah. So in '77, I was just getting into the Beatles at that point, and the Beatles were pretty much washed up old news. It's like I tell people that because somehow young people grasp onto the Beatles now, and and I tell them like in '77, '78, '79, nobody cared about the Beatles until, unfortunately, Lennon got shot. It's like they're just like, oh, that's old stuff. That's last decade stuff. Who cares?
Oh, not me. I would run to the store every time a new Wings album.
Oh, I did. But I'm just saying the average person is like, just
Oh, yeah, I know. Yeah, they weren't selling that well back in those days, except for Paul, maybe. Everyone in Ringo could hardly get a record out. It's amazing.
Right.
Yeah, things were different back then.
Yeah.
Yep.
He puts more. Yeah, he puts more records out now than he did then, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, he does. And they're much better now than they were then too. Honestly.
Yeah.
No, I was a Monkees fan until I got Let It Be. It was like for sale for like $1.99, and I was a kid and I couldn't afford. Most of my Monkee albums were I bought at yard sales things because I wasn't I wasn't old enough really.
Right.
When Let It Be came out, I guess I would have been around 12.
Yeah.
And I bought that. And it went, wow, these guys are better than the Monkees. And that's not even their best album, of course,
Yeah.
It's not their best album, but suddenly I became a Beatles fan. And then, I had every Beatles album I could afford to buy.
Yeah.
A funny story, too. I got my friends into it, and actually one of my friends I got into it ended up being the guitarist for my band I told you about.
Mm-hmm.
We became huge Beatles fans. But we were kids, and you couldn't afford to buy the White Album.
Mm-hmm.
Because, it's an expensive, it's a twos record set, and we were kids, we didn't have any money.
Right.
And we had no idea what it was.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't list the songs on it or anything. So he finally got it for like a birthday, and he came to me at school, and he said, look, I wrote down all the songs, and I looked at the songs. While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Piggy, The Continuing Story of Bungalow Bill. You're making this stuff up. This is ridiculous. And I thought he was kidding. Because I'd never heard of any of these songs. They weren't big hits or anything. And back in those days, you couldn't just go online and listen to them.
Right. Actually, I know that story because you told that story. Bruce Spicer opened it up for people like you and me, and
exactly.
we both got our stories in the White Album book he did recently. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I told that story to that book. That was kind of cool that he printed it. Yeah. Sorry, I repeated a story you already knew.
That's okay. No, that's cool. Because I don't think not everybody's read Bruce Spicer's book. By the way, Spicer has done excellent Beatles books. Get them all, even if they're out of print. Just get them. And I think he's an Abbey Road book is coming out any time now, so look out for that. So anyway, and he's a lawyer.
I have a couple of his. Got him autographed when I went to a Beatles convention one time too. He's a nice guy.
And he's a lawyer too. What's all this about lawyers and writing about Monkees and Beatles?
There are a lot of lawyer science fiction writers too. I'm discovering kind of interesting. It's like I guess if you're a lawyer, you're organized. You get things done. Because you wouldn't have gotten through law school if you couldn't do that kind of stuff. And sometimes writing requires you to just sit down and work, and just don't have that, discipline, I guess I should say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a good word to say. I mean, it's like one thing you could say about Beatles and Monkees, in their heyday at least, is like there was this tremendous discipline, and I'm reading this book currently about Harry Nilsson by Alan Shipton, and you I'm sure know about Lennon's Lost Weekend when he was in L.A. with Harry Nilsson and everything.
Yeah, but there was a great documentary about Harry Nilsson a few years ago that was very influential. Yeah,
but what the book was saying, Lennon produced Nilsson's Pussycats album, and the way Lennon was, according to May Pang, was outside the studio he was nuts and drinking and carousing and doing whatever, but once he got in the studio, very disciplined, stuck to business, wanted to record, didn't want to sit there and fool around, and it's interesting that all the Beatles had that, and McCartney still does now, this terrific discipline to get all these songs recorded. There's no real reason to, especially now, he's 80 years old, almost, and it's like
well, the Mickey Dolenz, you've heard Mickey Dolenz story about when he went over to England, right? And he goes to meet the Beatles, and he's all excited, and he goes to the studio where they're recording Good Morning, Good Morning.
Right.
And he's been there in all his hippie gear. He's expecting to either wild, fun time. And they're working.
Yeah.
They're treating it very seriously. They sit there, they do their work. It's their job.
Yeah.
And he was really impressed with how seriously they took their job. And so I stopped and had a nice little tea break.
So
it's a fun story he tells. Of course, Mickey always changes the story though, so he can sing "Oh Darling" instead. So making sense because "Oh Darling" didn't come until a couple years later.
Well, we're so crazy. We decided after our first Monkees book to do a second one. So and we've had. I won't go into our various issues going back and forth on it, but it's like I hope it was a fun experience to do the sequel book after you got going on it.
Well, it was more work than the first book. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
The first book was a lot more fun because I pick a song and I give my opinion, and everyone likes to give their opinion.
Yeah.
The sequel is more of a biography almost.
Right.
It's literally we go through it year by year and say, here's what they were doing, they went here, this is what happened here. It's almost a biography, but it's a year-by-year biography as opposed to a continual story, and we go back and forth between each one of them and say what they're doing. So that required a lot more work, a lot more research, and then a lot more writing. So it wasn't quite as much fun as the first book, but it's still fun.
It is true. It actually took more work for me too. I didn't let on about it, but it's like you realize the first book essentially you're covering like a 4-year period with a couple reunions.
Yeah, and a couple of sequels. Yeah, exactly. A couple of
whereas in this new book we're covering 50 plus years of material. And a lot of it because it's the solo stuff. For me was maddening because I go, well, did they really do this, or is this rumor and stuff like that? And it's like, there's
a lot of. There was periods where nobody wanted to buy their stuff. Davey was putting out his own stuff on his own records, and we can't find it.
Right.
All you can do is read about it on the internet, and there's songs that I can't find to listen to. I want to listen to it so I can write about it, and I can't find it anymore.
Yeah. Fortunately, and we've talked about this too. Those fellows that do 7A records are resuscitating all this stuff because they're fans of the solo material as well. So if it's not out now, it should be out in the next few years, hopefully, because you're not going to get any new Davy Jones material. So you might as well reissue the stuff that was out. That is now hard to find.
Their reissue of the old Mickey MGM stuff was pretty good. Some of that wasn't worth listening to, but it was great that they did it.
But I did like, you probably listened to, you've been on there, the Zilch podcast, and there's a recent one where the two fellows were on there talking about their recent Davy Jones live release, and they said, well, you can go on eBay and find the original records, but you're going to pay like $300 for them. You might as well just get our new one that sounds better and has a DVD and blah, blah, blah. So, they really care about this stuff. So.
Oh no, that's what you love best that's what's good about Rhino too. Once Rhino took over the Monkees catalog, they treated it with love. They did a good job.
Yeah.
And that was so nice to see because there were so many years where I couldn't even find half of the stuff.
Oh yeah.
And especially back in the days when you couldn't download songs, you had to find the CDs somewhere. And some of them were very bad quality.
Yeah. Well, like your friend in your Beatles story where he's saying you're making up the titles. There's this old book called The Monkees Scrapbook. It has a red cover, and it had like 3 pages of unreleased Monkees stuff. And this is before the Missing Links stuff. And I looked through these titles and everything, and I go, they're making this up. They how could they have possibly recorded 3 pages worth of songs? I was figuring maybe they did an extra dozen songs, but they had 3 pages worth of songs, and then slowly those Missing Links things came out, and wow, they were right. I mean, they really sang a song, "You Can't Tie a Mustang Down." Why, I don't know, but they did.
Yeah. Well, it was easy for the Monkees because half the time they didn't do the songs. They just walked in and sang for 20 minutes and left.
Right.
So you could have a huge, gigantic catalog and you got all the other people doing the work for you.
Right, but, I always assumed that it was a little more streamlined, especially with, Kirshner involved. Just say, hello, boys, we're going to do these 12 tracks and then go home. It's like, but they had a lot to choose from, so, it was just kind of weird that way.
Yeah, well, some of them deserve not to be released, as we say in the first book.
Yes. So,
It reminds me of the old Beatles, when I used to read the old Beatles book, and they talk about unreleased songs, like Gliding Circles or, Red Litmus Paper, and half of them were just made-up crap,
Yeah.
They really didn't exist.
Yeah. Or they were...
I can't think of any that actually did exist. Oh, Child of Nature was the only one that actually really existed. That got turned into John Lennon's Jealous Boy.
Right. I do talk about that. I mean, in my Beatles book, it's called Mark Arnold Picks on the Beatles, as a takeoff on Chet Atkins Picks on the Beatles. But I tried to cover all the ones, even the ones that don't really exist. I mean, it's and. That was one, for me, I was just doing that in my spare time. I wasn't really trying to make a book. I was just writing about the Beatles, and then it kind of evolved into a book over time. So, and as you know, and I'll say this about the Monkees book, I probably said it on this podcast before, and I do say it in the book, it's like when you approached me to do the Monkees book, I originally didn't want to do it because I thought, like you, there was somebody else that had done this, but they didn't do it as thoroughly. I'm as you know by now, I'm a pretty thorough person. I like to talk about everything. Sometimes to your dislike. Do we have to talk about all these instrumentals? It's like, yes, we have to talk about all the instrumentals, but but we worked it out and compromised and everything. But that was what I was noticing in the other books. Is like, they talk about their songs, but they leave things out. And it's like, I wonder what they thought about this song. They didn't even talk about it, And so.
Well, the other thing I wanted to do, and I thought this was important, more so in a Monkees book than a Beatles book, was making sure you had the songs in order when they were recorded. Yeah. Because when you add all those missing link songs, you don't get the impression of the evolution of the music, and that was important to me. So that's one of the reasons why the first Monkees book that you and I wrote together, we start with the very first song that was recorded and move timeline as they were recorded, whether they came out on an album then or 20 years later. Right. And I think that was something that the other books did not do, which I thought was important.
Well, it changed my perception of, like, instant replay. It's like, no wonder they called it that. It was all discards and throwaways from the earlier albums. They didn't really go into the studio to do that one, but I never thought about it before. I knew Teardrop City was kind of a retread of Last Train to Clarksville, but I legitimately thought they recorded it later, not at the same time. It's like,
exactly. There's a lot of those songs, like Shorty Blackwell, for instance, was recorded before Head. That could have been on Burton Music. Right. And you don't realize that until you look at the timeline and go, well, that makes more sense now, because they probably wouldn't have recorded this kind of song 3 years later. Right. Especially in the 60s. Yeah. Music changed so much from 1964 to 1969,
And you couldn't help it because the earlier Monkees records are pretty straightforward 2-minute 15-second pop records, and thanks to like Nesmith mainly and Dolenz to a certain extent, they got more wild, in some of their techniques and textures and what they're playing and song lengths and all sorts of weird things. And so you never would have gotten something like Daily Nightly out the gate in 65,
Oh, exactly. Yep. So. And that's part of the fun. That's why it's important to see. And you wouldn't have gotten Daily Nightly in 1970 either, Right. Like it's right in its time period.
Right. And, so it did help to put it in chronological order. Of course, in doing so, a couple of the songs on Good Times, their most recent album, had to be thrown way back into like 1967 or something. It was like, they did the instrumental track here, and then they had vocals later, but, such is the nature of their recordings, they could still put vocals on some of those instrumentals at this point, but,
But I don't know if they're ever going to do another album. I mean, they surprised us with the Christmas album last year. That song came out of nowhere. I don't know if they're going to do another one. I haven't heard any news they're going to do another one, but eventually we should probably update the book. Probably not until we're sure they're not going to put out another one.
Well, the only thing I know for sure
is going to die sooner or later, and that's going to be the end of it, pretty much.
Well, the only thing I know for sure is, and I added this to the book just today, or when I sent you that most recent revision, is on that Australian interview, Michael said, "I'm retiring from the Monkees again by the end of this year." So he may still tour, but I mean that might be the end of him with Mickey, which is fine. It's like hey, you don't have to tour forever, but it is like at the end of the era here, folks. So it's like,
Yeah. Yeah, it might be the end. The Christmas album might have been the last one.
Yeah.
So we'll have to update our book eventually.
Yeah.
To add that in.
Although, yeah, I could see maybe 10 years down the line, if they're like still around, maybe they might do a one-off single one more time just for old time's sake of Mickey and Mike or something, or do it a la Free as a Bird and do it a la Free as a Bird and put Davey and Peter in the background somehow. I don't know, but
exactly.
But I'm very happy with that they got anything out in the recent times, because I thought for sure when Davey passed away that was the end. They were never going to do anything again, and hey, they've surprised me so many times before, so
well, I think one of the things is Davey was the problem is they didn't all get along. Davey was a problem. They would argue with Davey, but apparently Mike and Peter hated each other.
Yeah.
So that made things difficult too.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of it was, Mickey gets along with everybody generally.
Yeah.
So you expect that, but I think Mike, once that happened, you're like, well, why not? Let's have some fun. I'm just so frustrated that I missed that concert, the last concert they did. I was there when Mike had the heart attack and had to be carried out.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was down near Philly, and my wife and I were there ready to go to the show, and Andrew Sandoval came out and said, "Oh, sorry, the show's canceled. Mike's going to the hospital."
So when it was rescheduled, you didn't get a chance to go?
I could not make the reschedule. My schedule is such that I never know, because of my job. Sometimes it's very difficult, and I just could not do it, unfortunately. But I am going to go see Mickey and his White album tour coming up soon in October.
Okay. Yeah, I think my last guest probably, I did a year ago the Monkees' Head, where Mickey and Mike spoke, and Henry Diltz was there, and a few other people were there, and they did play that on another Zilch podcast, so I'm happy I saw that. I did see the trio in various configurations in the past, and I did see Mickey up in Portland when he did that orchestra album, which is now on 7/8 Records also. So, but if Mickey does come around here again, I'll probably see him again. He seems the most likely to continue touring unless tragedy intervenes. Hopefully not. For another few years.
I've seen Mickey. Let's see. I've seen Mickey twice in concert. Once at a Beatles convention. And so I saw Mickey and Davey at the World Trade Center on my birthday years ago, which I talk about in the book too. So, I wish I could go to more, but sometimes it happens.
Yeah. And I've seen all four of them solo over the years, which I'm very happy with. And unfortunately or fortunately, I saw Davey 2 weeks before he passed away when he was at the autograph show in Hollywood. And I've said this story before, but I'll say it again. If somebody took a poll and said, who do you think will pass away by the end of February, Davy Jones would not have been on the list. There was people that were still alive, like Carla Lemley, she was 105, and Martin Landau was there, he was 88 at the time or something, and he wasn't looking very well, but both of them survived at least another year or two after Davy, which is really sad, but
Yeah. But even of the Monkees, you wouldn't have predicted Davy, You would think Peter, because Peter had always had health problems.
Right. Yeah. So, like they do say in the Zilch thing, I keep plugging them, they say, cherish it, anytime they come around, go see them, even if it's just a talk or if they're promoting a book or whatever, because you never know if you're a Monkees fan.
Yeah. Right. I just, there were periods in my life where I couldn't afford to do that kind of stuff, too. It was always a problem, but, that's all I can.
Right. But fortunately for me, Monkees have generally been very affordable. The one that's Paul, Ringo, and Rolling Stones have finally gotten out of my price range. I just can't see them anymore.
Yeah,
I'd love to. They're just.
I've never seen Ringo or Paul live because every time I look at it, it's so expensive. I go, I can't spend that much money for one night, especially when I go with my wife too.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Especially Paul. One time Paul was going to play in Philadelphia, and they said tickets go on sale on this date at this time. It's like log on, and the first half of the stadium is already filled, and the rest of the seats are way in the back, and they're $250.
Oh, jeez. Yeah. The last time I saw Paul, it was $50, and it was about 2004, and I think that's the last time I'll ever see him. Ringo was a little bit after that, and he was like $50. That's like my cutoff. Same thing with the Stones, but they're like in the hundreds now, 200 or 300 now. So I was like, can't do that.
No, it's so many of these big guys I wish I'd seen. I wish I'd seen Prince. I wish I could just see, Bruce Springsteen.
Mm-hmm.
There are all these people that I, would love to see, but I can't justify that expense,
Yeah.
Especially when, two people go, it's terrible.
Right.
Like, hey,
Or just go, sorry, honey, I can't afford you.
Hours to earn this much money. I got a good salary as a lawyer, but, if I could spend $1,000 to go out one night, or I can, get the washing machine fixed,
Right.
Sometimes you have priorities.
You're too practical. Come on.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Well, I guess it's the time of the show at the end here where, is there anything else you want to plug, or websites or anything else, or just restate all your most recent current books that are coming out?
Sure. Well, the Constitution book we talked a lot about. Big Stick is my most recent novel, which is a lot of fun. I hope you like it.
Okay.
And everything can be found on my webpage at michaelaventrella.com.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to mikeventrella.com, you get my law practice page, so don't go there. Unless you need a lawyer.
Okay. And how do you spell your last name, just for people who don't know how to spell?
Absolutely. Ventrella, Ventrella, and I have a blog called Ventrella Quest, Michael Ventrella's Quest for Truth, Justice, and the American Way, where I blog about politics mostly. But I also sometimes blog about the Beatles and other things too. So you might want to check that out. But there's links all over the place for that if you just go to the regular webpage.
Mm-hmm. And
generally speaking, if you search for Michael Ventrella, let me just tell you this: if you search for Michael Ventrella, you're going to find two people: me and the world's biggest loser. Let me tell you this quick story.
Okay.
The TV show World's Biggest Loser is one where they get these really obese people and they try to lose weight during the show, right? That's what it's called, The World's Biggest Loser.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the winners a couple of years ago was a guy named Michael Ventrella.
Oh, no.
So now, if you search for Michael Ventrella, you see Michael Ventrella, World's Biggest Loser. Oh, I was so happy about that.
Wow.
So don't go to his page. Come to my page instead.
And I thought my name was common. Anyway. Anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you. We'll, of course, continue to talk because we're going to finish up that Monkees book.
Exactly.
Hopefully sometime this year, but we'll talk offline about that. And anyway, it's been fun having you, and we will talk soon. Thank you for listening, and thank you again, Michael A. Ventrella, for being my special guest. Episode number 42 will be coming soon. If you would like to comment and or be a guest on this podcast, please drop me a line at funideas.mark@gmail.com. Become a Patreon of Mark Arnold and Fun Ideas Productions. If everyone listening just contributed $1 a month, that would be a tremendous help in continuing the production of my books and this podcast. Also, subscribe to my YouTube channel. The opening and closing music for the Fun Ideas podcast is provided courtesy of Andrew the Slow Poisoner Goldfarb and is used with permission. This has been the Fun Ideas podcast. This is Mark Arnold speaking. This episode is copyright 2019 Fun Ideas Productions. Thank you very much and have a good night.
Popping creation pills in the pink electric church. The final flicker of your lewd jeweled boob to